Everybody, thank you for coming out here this afternoon. I'm Jeff Mankoff with the Russia and Eurasia program here at CSIS, and I have the duty as well as the pleasure of welcoming you to our panel today with the Vaclav Havel Journalism Fellows, who are here under the auspices of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. The fellows this year are from countries that are affected by what we sometimes refer to here in Washington as frozen conflicts, even though that's not a wonderful term for a variety of reasons. But these are countries that have separatist regions where there's strong Russian involvement, difficult relations with Russia, uncertain prospects for integration into the Euro-Atlantic community, and that perhaps leaving aside Ukraine have not been front and center in United States foreign policy over the last decade plus. But nevertheless, which play a crucial and I think sometimes underappreciated role in European security and the advancement of transatlantic order and transatlantic values. So today we're very happy to have the Vaclav Havel Fellows here. We have fellows from 4 different countries that play different roles in these conflicts. We have, and I'll let the fellows introduce themselves when we get to their presentations. We have Salome Abkhazishvili from Georgia, Ksenia Churmanova from Russia, Stefan Grigoritsa from Moldova, and Yaroslava Kutsai from Ukraine. Each of them is going to speak to you for about 5 to 7 minutes just to lay out a little bit about the situation in their countries, their own observations, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Before we do that, though, I want to introduce and thank the 2 organizations that are sponsoring this event in partnership with CSIS. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, represented today by Ambassador Hynek Komonacek, and RFE-RL, represented by Joanna Levinson, who's the Director of Media and Public Affairs for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And so now, before we kick off the panel, I'd like to give the floor just for a minute to Ambassador Komonacek.
Push the button, okay. So thank you, Jeffrey. Thank all of you for coming. I think all of us are people who are interested in the modern world and the human rights, and one of the basic rules for such a person which exists here in Washington, I have already found. Anybody who knows something about the human rights calls Vaclav Havel Vaclav Havel. All the others call him Vaclav Havel. That's basically the first point of orientation, who is who in Washington's jungles, swamps, corridors, and mirrors. But anyway, I would like to welcome 4 young journalists here to Washington. I would like to thank all of you for coming for today's event. And because ambassador speeches are supposed to be very short, I will contribute with just one thing, which is my beloved quote from Václav Havel, not Vaclav Havel, Václav Havel. And that's something what is probably the most important for the events of today. The quote goes like that: "Follow the man who seeks the truth. Run away from a man who found it." If you keep that, you are good journalists. Thank you.
It's a useful piece of wisdom for all of us. I'd also like to give the floor briefly now to Joanna Levinson from RFE-RL.
Well, I want to thank the ambassador, but I think that last quote leaves us with a little bit of a conundrum, maybe. But thank you, everybody, for coming today and for gathering on behalf of the Vaclav Havel Journalism Fellowship. It's a program that Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty holds dearly, and we I think our understanding that it is of increasing value, perhaps, as the work of independent journalists gets harder. Just to give you just a bit of context before we begin, I promise I won't take long. We've been talking a lot about press freedom in the world today, and I just thought it would be useful to give you just a tiny sketch of the problems Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty journalists are facing in the field right now. You'll hear about our fellows and their experiences on the front lines, but again, I'll just give you a quick rundown of the kinds of challenges that face them and their colleagues in the world today. In Ukraine, we have a Crimean journalist who faces trial on Wednesday on charges of extremism for challenging Russia's annexation of Crimea. In Russia, we've had journalists beaten within the last 2 weeks. We've had a parliamentary committee question whether RFERL journalists are actually spies, and we've been subject to defamation on state-run media. In Moldova, we've been the direct target of an insult by the president of Moldova, who's accused us of trying to oppose his regime and work against his state. In Belarus, we've had journalists threatened with the loss of accreditation because of their coverage. The Azerbaijan government just last Thursday, I think, or Wednesday, we issued a press release, has sought to obtain a court order to ban our website in Azerbaijan. In Uzbekistan, we've had family members of an RFE reporter defamed on state TV. We have a journalist in jail in Turkmenistan. We had 2 Iranian journalists receive death threats this week, and we had a journalist sort of attacked physically and have her equipment broken in Macedonia on Thursday. So that's about 10 days in the life of RFERL. So with that, I wanted to express deep gratitude today for the enduring support of Ambassador Kmoniček and his embassy here and the Czech Foreign Ministry in Prague for their support, their ongoing support of this very important fellowship. It is a partnership between Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and the Czech Foreign Ministry. And it is a symbol of the strength of the U.S.-Czech bilateral relationship, but it is also a reflection of a set of foreign policy values that I think we share, that are espoused by Vaclav Havel, that are reflected in RFERL's mission, and that also guide this fellowship. And those values are truth, despite they remain truth, commitment to freedom of speech and freedom of the media, human rights, and of course, peace. I also would like to thank CSIS today for giving the fellowship this exposure and giving our fellows the opportunity to introduce themselves to Washington. This is a distinguished place for policy expertise and political thinking, and so truly we're grateful to have this opportunity here at CSIS today. And then finally, I just want to say that I'm honored to have this opportunity to present the Vaclav Havel Journalism Fellows to Washington. As I mentioned, this is a program that's very dear to us. It's in its 6th year. The fellows are the best and the brightest of the countries where they come from. They are intelligent and they are insightful and they are very dedicated to their jobs as independent journalists, and they are brave. And we are very proud of them, and we know Vaclav Havel would be also. So thank you.
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you for the reminder of what journalists in a lot of these countries face on a day-to-day basis, and the importance of quality journalism of the kind that RFERL provides. So without any further ado, I think we'd like to turn the floor over to our distinguished panel of fellows right now. And I think probably the best thing to do is just to go down the table in the order that we have folks seated. Each fellow is going to talk for just about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion. So our first presenter will be Salome Abkhazishvili from Georgia, who previously hosted a daily student talk radio run by the Georgian Institute of Public Affairs. And now, well, this can't really tell from this bio. I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for having us here. Thank you for coming here, because I feel a big responsibility to talk about very important issue that is the Russian influence in our country and in our region. But I will try to be very careful when I'm talking about this topic, and I will talk from my point of view, because I'm really young to to witness a lot of facts regarding to Russian-Georgian relationships. But I have some information, of course, and I'm working here at RFERL to know more about international policy and relationships with Russia also. So I will repeat, I will talk about my point of view, what I see the most big threat. So Jeffrey started talk about me. So I'm working for Georgian service at RFERL. I had an experience of working for TV, Georgian public broadcaster, and a little experience for working in other radio in my country. I had a master's degree in nationalism and ethnicity studies, and I want to mention this because I have some knowledge about identity policy and how it reflects on the relationship between different countries. And I will start to talk about the main sources of propaganda, Russian propaganda in my country, and I will talk about from different generation side, because Georgia, everyone knows that Georgia was a part of Soviet Union, and we have generation, my parents and grandparents generation, who, not my parents, but this generation has still this nostalgia in the Soviet Union, and they were always very important target of this kind of propaganda, as I see. But I'm representing the young generation, and I can say that in this generation there is decreasing this kind of feelings that we are target of this propaganda, and we have some, we don't have this nostalgia, and everyone from my generation is very happy that we have this great news. We have visa-free regime already with Europe, and most of them from my generation are are trying to have education in Western countries, and they don't have any special interest or some feelings that they should, that they have some similarities with Russia, and so that's the generation perspective I wanted to mention. And what about sources of propaganda? I can say that there are a lot of reports about these sources of propaganda, and one important source is I can say that the Georgian society is very religious and conservative society, and sometimes Russian propaganda, these agents are trying to use these feelings and tell people that Western society and Western countries are trying to danger, or to make some threats and danger to our culture, our identity and religion, and Russia is the only way to be more independent, to save our faith, Christian faith, and it works in many cases, because we had a lot of demonstrations against minorities, I mean sexual minorities, when people were talking about that, so they are the threats of our society. And in these demonstrations, according a lot of reports, there were a lot of Russian groups and propagandistic groups, so it was a big issue several months ago and several 2-3 years ago. But now I feel, and we have a lot of reports also, that people are more tend to be close to the Western society, and it means that in this society, there is the decreasing these threats of to be the victim of propaganda, Russian propaganda. I also want to say a very important detail. Today we had a talk, we talked about the role of media and independent media, and there was some very interesting remark for me that we should tell people what we are doing. Journalists, we should tell people what we are doing and how we are doing this. And I think it's very important to tell people, the Georgian population in my country, that to be very transparent and to talk a lot what we are doing, because sometimes they even don't understand what does it mean, relationships with Western society and Western countries. Because I read a very important report from IDFI, and there was 3 main national threats that are mentioned by Georgian society is poverty, jobs, and inflation. And relationships with EU and Western society, and also NATO integration, and relationships with Russia are very in the after these state issues. So they still don't understand why we need to talk even with Western society, and why, what kind of relationships should we have with Russia. So I think that here is very important to journalists have, and media has a very important role to talk them what does it mean relationships with Western countries and with Russian, even with Russian Federation. I will add very important, I started talking about media's role and journalists' role, and journalists' role, and so I had a case 2 weeks ago. There was a meeting between Putin and so-called South Ossetia, the president of South Ossetia, so-called Republic of South Ossetia, and I tried to get news. What was, how was this meeting went on, and what was the topics they discussed? But I could not find any source in Georgian sites and websites to use them for reporting for RFERL, and the only website I found was Sputnik, and then I realized that here there should be a lot of credible media sources who should report about these important meetings and important events, just to educate people what's going on in the region, in our regions, and in the neighboring countries. So media education and educate people about international policy and regional policy is very important tool to fight with propaganda, I think so. Thank you very much. I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salome. Next, let's go to Ksenia Churmanova.
Hello. Okay. I'm sorry. I got a wonderful opportunity to continue work with these issues, and I started to write about human rights and business environment. Also, we are working now with the video production that has enormous impact on social in social networks for the audience in the internet. And I would like to tell about my perception today of Russian government influence through media and with the help of other tools on Russian citizens who live both in Russia and outside it. For example, in the Transdniester statehood, that is unrecognized unrecognized Republic of Moldova. When I came back from just a few weeks ago, I was there for a working trip. Firstly, talking about how much the Russian audience trusts on the state-affiliated media through which this influence is actually exerted. There are polls which is produced by Independent Levada Center, is one of the most prominent research centers in Russia, and these polls say that it's enormous number of people. According to the last research, there are 56% of people who trust on news broadcasted by TV channels, mainly, which are actually mainly state-owned. Of course, that is because there are a lot of very strong and very nice, sometimes, entertainment content, and which people watch. But not because of the news, but still the number of people who are watching traditional media, which are state-owned, very big. There is one truth, but another truth that more people nowadays are choosing the alternative media channels, and we see the consequences of that. At the last parliament elections, for example, in September 2016, last year, voter turnout in St. Petersburg, which is actually considered to be as one of the most caring and non-indifferent about politics city in Russia, this turnout was around just 25%. And another evidence is how many people showed up in the streets in the end of March, protesting against corruption in the government all around the country. It may mean that they have simply see this mismatch between the Putin's, Medvedev's, or other officials' speeches translated by state-affiliated media with the real economic instability that we have now in the regions, in all of the regions of Russia. That is why such disinformation about Russian economic power provided by some Russian media imposes, to my mind, big influence not on the Russian citizens who live in Russia and who can compare the reality with the agenda that are broadcasted by TV channels, but also on the Russian citizens who live outside Russia and who also have a right to vote and to participate in the elections. One of these regions, which I already mentioned, which is strongly influenced by Russian propaganda, is Transdniester, this internationally unrecognized republic. And there is a big amount of people who has not just passports of Transdniester and Moldovan Republic, but also the citizenships of Russia. Of course, some of them have Moldovan citizenship or Ukrainian, but most of the population have Russian citizenship. And being isolated, they apparently don't have anything to compare the content of Russian state media. They watch primarily with the reality that we have in the regions of the country. In Transdniester, I spoke mostly with the young people who was born shortly after, or shortly before or after the conflict of the beginning of 90s. And we can also talk about their national identity today if you're interested, because that's, for me, that was very important to understand with what national identity they live there, how they identify themselves. And I understood that they have really difficulties with defining it, with defining to what a nation they belong to. As for the recognition of Transdniester and Moldovan Republic, I got one very interesting opinion and maybe very controversial. Thank you. It's very nice that I'm changing. Right. Yeah. So one person whom I talked told me that it would be probably better if the international world and foreign countries will give the recognition to Transdniester just to let people understand what they're capable to do being independent from Moldova. some people there probably fairly think that the Kremlin continues to provide military, economic, and political assistance to them to change the balance in Moldova between the pro-Russian community that live there and people who is performing for European Union integration. And not giving the recognition to them from the Russian government is a sort of way to lose the support in Moldova. And that is one of the possibilities to exert the influence in Moldovan domestic politics. Moreover, Transnistria, which is very interesting for me as well, and which is also very important and explains why it is so stable and so closed community. It has the economic empire called Sharif. That is the previous police person, people who worked in the Ministry of Inner Affairs, and this monopolist which occupied all the production in the territory, the main TV channel, the football club, all the supermarkets, oil stations, alcohol, Stolgian, bakery factories, everything are owned by Sharif, which is in the same time affiliated with this, with the so-called Supreme Council, Supreme Soviet that is working there. So that is something I'm very interested to discuss today, and I also think that we could take into consideration the tense frontiers, which is the topic of our discussion, which exist in Russia itself between the government and the journalists, and also between the government and political and civil activists who have now a different type of pressure. Probably I have this impression that we have, the journalists as well, have the different type of pressure comparing nowadays with the beginning of Putin's presidency and even with the beginning of 2010, when the journalists were executed and attacked. If we remember, probably you know about this, the journalist who wrote about Himki Lest, Oleg Kashin and Mikhail Beketov, who was attacked in the beginning of in 2010. So that's very, also another side of spreading the Russian government influence that we can discuss. It is the production of news made by so-called factory of trolls. There is even in St. Petersburg, it exists, there is the factory of trolls, very pro-patriotic, pro-Russian outlet which unites 16 media and which is spreading the comments about all the international affairs, about the Russian affairs. And so they are very pro-Russian, and they have very big power in the internet, and so spreading everything around the web. So that's very extensive and interesting discussion. I will be glad to talk more about any of the issues I've mentioned, and probably something else that you're interested more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ksenia. Discussion of Transdniester provides a nice segue over to Stefan Grigorica from Moldova.
Hello, my name is Stefan. I'm from Moldova. Yeah, it's the same country as Transnistria, only Transnistria is claiming its own independence. So, I graduated international relations and political sciences, and then I worked for the government in Chisinau. Yeah, it's okay? Oh yeah. I worked for the local government in Chisinau, and then I decided to make a transit and switch my field of activity. So I decided to start studying journalism and then activate as a political correspondent back in Chisinau, in my home country. And meanwhile, I was trying to develop my new media skills, such as creating infographics and social videos and everything which is required to make your storytelling much more interesting and captivating. And after that, I had the wonderful opportunity to be a Vaclav Havel Fellow and be in Prague, and of course have the wonderful opportunity to be right here in front of you and speak about Moldovan Russian influence in Moldova. So to start, for example, I really love to classify Russian influence in Moldova in mainly starting with the political influence. So mainly the political influence can be structured in like 4 points. The first is the nowadays president of Republic of Moldova, Igor Dodon, who is who was directly supported during the previous election, previous electoral campaign, when he was directly supported by Russian media, and he is really tied up with groups of interest around the Kremlin, and before that he was the president of one of the most pro-Russian parties, the Socialist Party, in which program, in their program, they have the denunciation of the association agreement of Moldova with European Union. The second part is the Socialist Party, which Dodon, after he got into the president's office, he had to resign from the post of the president according to our electoral law. So that party has a direct kind of a direct agreement with one of the so-called opposition parties in Russia. It's called Spravedlivaya Rossiya. I don't know how to translate in Russian.
Just Russia.
Just Russia, yeah. And it's a lot of it's really intertwined, the relation between Socialist Party and the different groups of interests in Moscow. And you can see a lot of times the MPs from Socialist Party going to Moscow and vice versa, a lot of MPs from Moscow coming to Chisinau and so on and so forth. The third pillar, it's it's Mr. kind of Renato Usate, who is nowadays is being wanted by the Moldovan authorities for some accusation, and he is now based in Russian, in Moscow. He ran basically in Moscow, and from there he has a lot of live streaming via Facebook. He's really quite popular among using the social media in this kind of way. And of course, one of the main factor is Transnistria and the influence of Russian politics in Transnistria, and mainly in the political class and the political society over there. For example, at the previous elections, they had the Transnistrians had election at the end of the following year, 2016. Yeah, they had elections, and mainly it was kind of a competition on who loves Russia most. This was basically their whole electoral campaign, and the incumbent president lost to Evgeny Shevchuk, lost to nowadays the president of the region, Vadim Krasnoselsky, who, if I'm not mistaken, who owns the Sharif Group, who owned, I think, the Sharif Group, which incidentally owns Transnistria, like everything in Transnistria. The second part I love to talk, it's about the media, the Russian influence in media in Moldova. So mainly, for example, this last week we had the result of it's called the public opinion barometer, and over there you find a lot of. I really love to read about the. We have this situation when Mr. Putin has a popularity of 65–66% of Moldovans in Moldova. They trust Putin. On the other hand, over let's say 73% of Moldovans don't trust Mr. Poroshenko. So here, if you are looking to the narratives of Russian media all over the place, you mainly see the consequences in this situation, in our public opinion, and basically it's everywhere. Another thing which is really important is about in the media. We have the situation when a lot of TV stations in Moldova are rebroadcasting the Russian programs, and some of them due to the fact that The Russians are investing really good and are making really good quality media products. They are quite popular in Moldova, and among those quality entertainment products, sometimes they sneak some crucial political information facts. And one of the last influence, which I also I need to mention, is the fact that Russia still has an economic influence in Moldova. Unfortunately, at this moment, even though we had to kind of like a lot of percentage of our economic and our exports are going through Russian market. And this concerns the agricultural products such as wine and fruits. And if it happens already twice, so in the cases when Moldova says that shifts a little bit too fast towards the European Union, Russians decide overnight that our products are not better, are not good, they have chemicals and something like this. So in a way, to conclude, this is usually creates kind of a climate of stability and uncertainty among the society, because every elections in our country for the last, let's say, 10 years, it's a fight between East and West. And you can see it's a fight between European Union and the Eurasian Union nowadays. It's every day, everywhere. If you have questions, please ask. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. Our final presenter, Yaroslava Kutsai from Ukraine.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a journalist from Ukraine. I previously worked for Ukrainian TV channel called Пятый канал and Ukrainian Ecological Center, and I cooperated with Ukrainian National Geographic, mostly focusing on environmental issues, and it's an honor to be Vaclav Havel Fellow, and as a part of my project, final project, I'm doing a report about human right to water, and not so long ago, I went to Slovenia, which is the first country in the European Union to enshrine human right to water in their constitution. A very interesting precedent and something for Ukrainian audience to bear in mind. So, probably, as you probably know, May 3rd is the UN-designed World Press Freedom Day. But for us Ukrainians, it's also an important day because on this day there will be a trial of RFRL's contributor Mykola Semena, a Crimean journalist who is fighting what he says is politically motivated separatism charge on the Russian-controlled Black Sea Peninsula. Semena, he was documenting the invasion that was being denied by Kremlin. And the charge against him stems from an article he wrote for RFRL, one of RFRL's website, Crime Reality, which in 2015. And it was a column in which he criticized Russia's seizure of Crimea, and he expressed support for strengthening a blockade of the peninsula initiated by Ukrainian activists. So he basically expressed his opinion, and he suffered as a result of it. And the Kremlin-installed authorities in Crimea have accused him of the violation of Russia's territorial integrity, and now Semena is barred from leaving Crimea and must seek permission from those who condemned him to travel outside Simferopol. And if convicted by Russia, he will face 5 years in prison. Unfortunately, it's not the only example of this politically motivated trials. Today, more than 30 Ukrainians face conditions of restricted freedom in Russia, Crimea, and parts of Ukraine in Donbas region. Western media is, of course, trying to, just to shed the light on this situation. But there is one very dangerous tendency which I would like to mention. The majority of media in the West speak about the war in the Donbas as being run by Russia-backed separatists. But is that true? We know that in the end of 2016, a Ukrainian hacker group released emails that were purportedly taken from the office of Vladislav Surkov, and this is the Kremlin official who oversees Ukrainian policy for Vladimir Putin. And these so-called Surkov leaks, they provide irrefutable and quite explicit evidence that the self-proclaimed states in the east of Ukraine are not independent actors. So we see that Moscow is guiding and managing these breakaway states, and even paying invoices for their equipment. And we can see that from, for instance, one of the Donetsk People Republic, so-called Donetsk People Republic officials, Denis Pushilin, he sent the expense list to Mr. Surkov, which includes the cost down to, laptops and cameras. And this is the evidence that Russia wages hybrid war. And but despite this, Russia denies even supplying separatists in eastern Ukraine with weapons and military gear. But video from this region, which you also can find at RFRL website, has shown modern version of Russian weaponry. Ukrainian media also face a lot of challenges, but perhaps now one of the major challenges for us is that journalists who expose corruption on the higher level, they're often accused of being non-patriots and even betrayers, as some assume that in the times of turmoil and war, you should not focus on things that could possibly play in favor of your enemy. So then the question we have to deal with is, of course, self-censorship and this tension between your journalist identity and your citizen identity, how they should coexist. And for me, it was especially interesting while covering environmental issues, because Ukraine seeks energy independence from Russia. I remember back in 2013, when you would speak badly of fracking, you would be accused of being a Russian agent, because on official level, it was considered as one of the options that could help Ukraine to get means and not to rely on a Russian energy supply that much. And the same is with, for instance, hydropower plants. When you warn about consequences that building a dam can bring to the local communities who live by the watershed, it's also likely that you will face a lot of criticism, and if you go on social networks, you also have to have stamina to somehow deal with criticism. And according to Freedom House in Ukraine, recent democratic gains have bolstered media freedom overall, but attempts to foster patriotic reporting raised question about government's commitment to media autonomy. So when answering the question whether how the journalist identity should coexist with the citizen's identity, I think the most important thing is just to remember that the most valuable is trust, and it's very hard to achieve it, but very easy to lose. So by warning the public about different aspects of certain governmental activities, we ensure that we're doing journalism and not counter-propaganda.
Okay, thank you very much, Yaroslava. That was a really good way to wrap up, sort of bringing it back to the role of journalists and journalism in these countries. I think sometimes there's a tendency to bifurcate both here and in your countries between seeing things as either pro or anti-Russian. But I think you've given us a good analysis of why the picture is much more nuanced than that, and sometimes the imperative to be anti-Russian can actually make the job of independent journalists in these countries more difficult. We have a little bit more than half an hour for discussion. I'm going to start by just tossing a couple of questions out to our panelists, and then we will open it up to the audience. The first thing I'm interested in hearing from many or all of you about is what has been the most eye-opening part of being here, of seeing how journalism is practiced in the United States. What did you not expect, or what is different about it from how you see it being practiced in your own countries? And then the second is, especially here in Washington, we've been having a lot of conversations recently about Russian influence, disinformatia, and the role of propaganda. And I'm curious if you think that the experiences that you've covered and that you've been discussing with us from your countries have any lessons that maybe those of us here in the United States could learn from your country's experiences. So I will throw that open to whoever wants to take it, and then we'll just have a discussion with the audience.
I can start. I don't think that I'm in the age and in the step of my professional development that I can teach you something, but I think that I already mentioned today this very. I had an interview with one of very interesting man who is an expert in counter propaganda, and he told me very interesting detail and way just to learn how we can fight against propaganda. We know how the propaganda works. They have very attractive ways to be more popular among society. They are creating a lot of trolls. They are creating a lot of videos and attractive visual stories to be influenced. And maybe professional journalists and traditional media should start seeing about these attractive ways to give information society according to this attractive way, not like them, but according, they should start how to be attractive in gathering and spreading information. Maybe it will be very useful way to be more popular in the society who still believes fake news and trolls and this kind of propagandistic issues.
So maybe less the substance and more the packaging.
Sorry.
Maybe focus more on the way that the information
Yes.
is presented on the packaging.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, regarding the packaging, I think that's a brilliant point because, for instance, if what we are trying to do within our Ukrainian service or our FRL is actually try to come up with this creative ideas regarding how we can bring the public as much information as we can, but to do it in, say, few minutes, because, you know, the attention span is very short and it's getting even shorter with the abundance of information circulating through the social media. So now we're experimenting more and more with this social media, so social videos, and it's kind of probably something new for the whole radio, and it seems like it gets a lot of exposure, and people they reply to that, and I think that's probably one of the successful examples of how we could provide this attractive packaging. Because, you know, truth is quite frequently inconvenient and unattractive, and people would rather, you know, just watch Russia Today because they make everything so simple, you know, world is black and white, but when you say no, it's 50 shades of gray, you know, and or more, you know, not everyone is comfortable with this, so yeah. But I think we're experimenting a lot with the packaging, and this is what we've been doing for the last half a year here.
Answering to your question about what the US can learn from my country, probably now it is also the challenging period for the US and with the new president, and it is possible to learn from Russia how to continue working under the circumstances when the journalists are attacked verbally and non-verbally by the political officials, and how to continue working and how to continue struggling with it, how to continue doing fair journalism and to getting the feedback from political structures. As for what we can learn from, and what we are learning actually now, and what the Russian service is learning, it is how the American media covering the stories aimed to the young generation. For example, BuzzFeed video stories, or the live air and the programs that are produced by the new media that was established by the ex-editor of BuzzFeed, that is Cheddar. And it's also very nice to learn how they're packaging the video stories and how they are getting the new audience, because sometimes I think that young generation in Russia, they're feeling the lack of innovative way of journalism and getting the news agenda.
I wanted to add that, first of all, I think even Moldova and USA needs to learn, firstly, the fact that usually we don't need to have a divided society in both. In Moldova, we have a really divided society among those who support the European Union and those who support Russia, or those who are a little bit like liberal ideologies, and someone who are more inclined to support more of the right, and something like this. This is not good when you have a divided society, and I think both countries need to learn that usually this division, if it's not solved at a particular moment, you can have really bad consequences, and you can have you can have a lot of things which are not really good, which are not good for your country in the future.
Very, very true. Okay, let's take some questions from the audience now. We have microphones, so please wait for me to call on you, get a microphone, identify yourself, be brief, and please ask a question. Okay. So.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys, for your wonderful presentations. I'm Nikolai Vorobyov, Ukrainian political and military journalist, so just arrived from the front lines a couple of weeks ago. And I would like to address my question, and also to Jeffrey, how to counter Russian propaganda aggression, which is an essential part of hybrid wars, especially in conflict zones, among those people who live there, either on our side in Ukraine, for example, or on the separatist side. So basically, despite we cut all these the cable networks for them, so they are not they can't watch Russian TV, but they can establish their own satellite, which is also pretty effective. These people, they don't have access to social media, they don't watch RFE and so forth. So basically, and of course, because of watching this zombie media, which Russian locals and in the so-called republic, they provide to them, which is really funny, of course, and just, I don't know if you can watch it, but you can watch it close to the front lines. So basically, how to deal with these people who live on the occupied territories or close to the front lines and who watches this Russian media. Thank you.
Anybody want to take that? Okay.
Well, Kora, thank you so much for your question. Well, I think that, you know, this is the question that actually our government had taken care of many years ago, you know, just the state of mind of these people, you know. And now for journalists, I think that the most important thing is just to do their job, you know, following the standards, because, and I think that this is very important that you've gone to the front lines, right? And there are many other journalists who are also going there to see with their eyes what's going on there, and they're talking to people, and it's very complicated because, you know, I've recently talked to one of the Czech journalists who is preparing an exhibition about the humanitarian issues in these regions, and she says that people might have different opinions on what is going on, but on both sides of the barricades, they are having problems with, for instance, water supply and sanitation. So they, some of them, they even don't care that much about the politics, but they just see the kind of this kind of turmoil, you know. And I think that yeah, that for journalists, it's they don't have to try to save the world, you know. They don't have to be superheroes. They just have to stick to standards. And if they can go to front lines and talk to people, try to bring them first-hand information, this is good. But otherwise, they should just yeah, do their job properly. I think it's yeah, just the standards are there, they're written. So I think that's the most important thing.
Add something. I'm from Georgia, as I mentioned before, and we have, you know, these two separatist regions. And I think the only way we can, because this is very difficult situation. We can say that Russia is a monopolist, information monopolist in this region, and we cannot access them just to tell them some real facts and the information from our side. We just don't have any possibility to talk with them. But I think we can use, if it will be the fair term, we can use the relatives of these, the people who are living in these regions, just to talk them and tell them what's happening, and we are talking about them, we are interested in their problems, and these relatives who are living in Georgia, and they are they can tell them that we are interested in their problems. So this is my answer.
So it's not only a question of the media, it's a question of engaging lots of other stakeholders as well. Did anybody else want to touch on this?
May I answer? Yeah. I can't say that, I can probably agree with you that all the people in these territories, in these separatism territories, are brainwashed. And so when I traveled to Transdniester, I understood that there are people who see the reality as it is, and who are reading, who are very educated, who are reading the different alternative media, who is not just watching the Russian TV channels. Of course, all the generation, they prefer and they primarily watch the traditional TV channels, but I think it's happening in all the regions, even in Russia. As for young generation, most of them with whom I talked, they are planning to emigrate and not to Russia because they consider this country and its international politics as non-peaceful, and they criticize it. And at the same time, they understand that Transnistria, from the economic point of view, it could be somehow a loss project for Russia. So they see the reality critically, and they consider they are taking into consideration the news not just from different sources. And of course, there are people who will assume Kiev as a Nazism regime. There will be people who will tell that Crimea and South Ossetia felt genocide in 2008 and 2014. But there will be always people who understand and see the reality because they are taking their information from different sources, and so they critically think in audience. That's why we can't say that all the people they are watching just traditional media. Of course, they needed to be educated, and they needed to be broad-minded with taking different alternative resources.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds me of something Salome said in her presentation, which was about this generational divide and how people of different generations turn to different sources for their information. And I think, as you're pointing out, that's true in the separatist-held areas as well. The people who live there have complex identities. They are in touch with people who live in other parts of the country and in other countries, other parts of the world. So even though the preponderance of information that they get may be coming from these state-controlled sources in Russia, especially for people who have access to social media, that's not the only place they're going to get information. Okay, in the back.
Thank you. I think the presentation today is really wonderful. I've been to all of your countries, covering all the issues that you are talking about. I was a foreign correspondent, and now I collaborate with the New York Times and Political Europe. And I myself know that the problems that you raise are really very important, but also the problem is not only in journalistic force, because we've got in all our countries really a lot of talents and a lot of hardworking people. But the problem is that there are no platforms where you could propose the independent voice, even if to avoid the concept of money. And I'm listening to your presentations, and I think they are very, very great, and I even quote them. But my question, what makes you being optimistic about the region of Eastern Europe, and why do you think that journalism, maybe cannot save the world, but in any case, make changes, make difference, and help the West to understand the Eastern Europe, or help, influence the situation somehow? Thanks.
Okay, sources of optimism.
I think the Eastern European region is optimistic by nature. People over there are optimistic usually, and we passed through a lot of problems. A lot of empires were fighting over mainly in that region, and our people are really adapted to hard times. And even though we have some problems nowadays, so we will manage to conquer them in a matter of a generation, I think.
I don't know, elections. Maybe some exact examples, I don't know, political, I don't know, maybe you're waiting for Putin being re-elected, I don't know, anything like that.
I think in this region, the best example of a good example it is Romania. For example, they had a lot of progress in fighting corruption in the last 5 years, and people over there are really supporting the so-called the Western values, And usually Romania is nowadays a kind of an example and the last island of stability in the middle of uncertainty, because you have Viktor Orban in Hungary, who has a recent shifts of position. You have Ukraine, who is still under conflict with Russia. You have Moldova, who has a pro-Russian president. Bulgaria, who also has a pro-Russian president. And I think Romania, it's still a good, a good example of a good start for this region, if it's okay.
I would add that I'm feeling very optimistic about the country and the future of the countries of the fellows, of other fellows, but I'm not feeling optimistic about Russia. Because I think that next year we won't have any changes when we have the elections, and not because of the people who will elect, because I think that people starting to think different, and they are starting to take things critically, but there will be again, I think, and I'm taking it realistically, that there will be again falsifications in the elections, and we can't expect the changes of the last year, but we will make our job in a good way, journalists and all the civil activists, and yeah, but the reality is like that. I expect it to be like that.
I can add, I have some points to be optimistic in my country and in the region, I can say. There are a lot of reports that Georgia in this region are maybe the leader in democracy and human rights and in journalism. Me personally, I don't have any threats as a journalist, so and I'm really free to work and do and say what I think and what I see in the regions of Georgia and in the capital also. I think another point is the national identity. We have very strict identities that we are not part of any great nations. We are the nation who always seeking independence, and this point makes us strong to be independent, and we proved it when we become a very close partner of European Union and other Western societies and organizations, and we got a visa-free regime, and I think that, and I also mentioned this generational perspective, that I know a lot of my friends, and not only friends, the representatives of my generation that really they are really interested in relationships with Western societies and defend democracy. So I'm really optimistic in this way. Thank you for the question.
To add, right. So there are several things in my country that make me optimistic. Is that, for instance, there is no lack of high-quality investigations on corruption on various levels, and there is no lack of access to this kind of investigations. Even if a journalist can't broadcast it via on television, which is controlled by media tycoons mainly, journalists can use various web platforms, and so and it's developing quite fast. And I think that one of the positive trends which we can observe in Ukraine, despite of this very difficult political situation, is that IT industry is growing quite rapidly, and it's something that it's very rarely mentioned, but when you stumble upon certain figures, you get surprised that we have brainy people, and hopefully there will be no brain drain, and those people could contribute to our country. And this is something that makes me very, very optimistic. And something else, just briefly will add, is that Ukraine started talking about climate change more, because a few years ago it was considered as a myth, and it's a huge step for us that it became a part of our like political agenda.
Glad it became part of the political agenda in Ukraine. Okay, yeah.
Sure. Hi, Ross Johnson. In your experience, I mean, you've talked about Russian information activities in the three countries. How much of that is confined to Russian language media, and to the extent it takes place in Georgian, in Romanian, in Ukrainian, that's a little more complicated. How significant is that, and what are the mechanisms by which the Russian Federation could convey its points of view in the local languages? Thank you.
Okay, if we are talking about Moldova, in Moldova, people usually learn from school, and usually they know Russian language pretty well. And usually the televisions and the most popular 10 TV stations in Moldova, if you are taking by ratings, the most 10 most popular, usually 5 of them, among them, are rebroadcasting Russian TV programs. So unfortunate, and from the rest of those 5, you have 1 or 2 of them which are Moldovan-based channels, but are broadcasting in Russian language. Nowadays, usually the government adopted a new changes to the law which somehow oblige the TV stations to broadcast in prime time 3 hours of TV programs in state language. This is one of the fights.
Thank you for the question. You mentioned Georgia, and I can say that I'm the part of the representative of generation who can understand Russian but don't speak Russian. I'm only using it when it's very obligatory or mandatory to use and to speak in Russian. So the same is in my generation. Most of my friends and the representatives of young generation choose not to use the Russian sources. I can say it's because they are always using some Georgian and international sources, English language sources, but not Russian. This is most popular in, again, my parents and my grandparents' population generation, and in this kind of old generation. So I can say that optimistically that it will not be the field for propaganda, these Russian language outlets in Russia, in my generation, in the future. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Well, the question of language is very sensitive for us Ukrainians, because many of representatives of Western media even consider that this is because of the language, that the language was one of the reasons why the war started, but it's more complex than that. In Ukraine, probably most of people would consider themselves bilingual. Well, almost everyone can speak, apart from Ukrainian, Russian as well. Well, it depends, in some remote areas in the West, they might not speak Russian, but they understand Russian. In some remote areas in the East, it can be vice versa. But speaking about the influence of Russian language and media, it's very hard, for instance, for printed publications in Ukrainian to survive, because the investors, they usually consider that it would not be profitable enough to publish, to have printed media in Ukrainian. It's like the case was National Geographic, the Ukrainian edition. It unfortunately was shut down, and one of the reasons is just because it was very expensive to publish in Ukrainian. And this is the issue that worries a lot of, that is worrisome for many Ukrainians. But since we have online platforms, I think it's changing a bit, and Ukrainian media develop more. But because we are currently in the state of this information war, it's also important to publish things in Russian for the Russian language audience, which is broader. So this is what many Ukrainian language media are doing in parallel. You know, they're trying to sort of like widen their audience by virtue of publishing materials in Russian language as well.
Hi, my name is Umida Hashimova. I'm from CNA. We did a report recently on media, and I wondered if you agree. One of the conclusions was, so media in the country, so there's let's say if there is a propaganda and non-propaganda media, people just choose, choose to watch things that they feel close. Like people who watch propaganda, they won't switch to other sources, Western sources, they don't switch. So do you agree that those kind of, you know, in the one country you have this parallel worlds, people who kind of live in two different media worlds, and it's hard to break into those? Do you let just go on like that, or do you do something to bring those kind of, those two worlds together? I mean, we talked about generational things. I mean, the people who trust Russian media and will never trust anything else, right? Do you just let this generation go on and die out and then kind of focus more on the younger generation? I would be interested to know about.
Okay. For me, there was a kind of like, you know, an epiphany moment, because you're asking about this like parallel realities, right? I remember when during Maidan, and Mr. Vorobyev will not allow me to lie, so there was, so the protests, people started gathering in the Maidan Square, and we have like a shopping mall underground, you know, under this Maidan Square. And when the people were protesting, you know, me and several of my colleagues, we needed to charge our equipment, and we went out into this shopping mall, and we've seen that people, while, you know, millions of people were gathering and protesting, there were hundreds of people, you know, shopping. And you know, I started questioning myself, oh my goodness, you know, how come? You know, there's some historic events taking place, and these people, they're just being this plain consumerists. What are they thinking about? They have to tell something to their grandchildren, and their grandchildren will ask, so where have you been, Grandma? Oh, well, I was just shopping while there was Maidan, you know. And yes, I think that the most striking thing is this indifference. Many people, they just don't care, you know, and even though that there is an ongoing war, and Russia annexed Crimea, many people, you know, they just go with the flow, and they prefer to not think too much about the current situation, because it's very unsettling. But at the same time, you know, because we need to be positive as well and optimistic, after Maidan in 2014 and 15, just imagine this number, like quarter of the population became volunteers. So they contributed as much as they could to help like soldiers in eastern regions, which I think it's, you know, when you think of the nation of which has more than 40 million people, I think it's quite something. Yeah, does it answer your question? You know, it was just like some of the. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say, you know, because even among old people who have Soviet nostalgia, were a lot of volunteers. And during Maidan, they were going out and helping just strangers, protesters, as if they were their own children, you know, and it was a very beautiful moment. And even though that many say that we wasted another revolution, you know, because there was Orange Revolution, we expected change and it didn't happen. But I think that it's still there, you know, and it's something that fuels our media, you know, young journalists who travel more, you know, who have opportunity to go to United States, you know, to learn the best practices you have here. I think that they have a different mindset.
Okay, I think we have time for one final question. If there aren't any more, we'll give you the floor again.
My name is Yuri Terekov. I'm an editor of Rufabula, one of the few independent Russian web outlets. My question is, you as a journalist, how do you assume the responsibility and importance of to distinguish between the Kremlin and the Russians when reporting ordinary Russians? Because I believe that the careless language can alienate those Russians who desire free and European future for their country. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting question, because when I was studying abroad the first time, I was considered like, if I'm a Russian, I am on the side of the Kremlin. So people abroad, they don't feel that we have some opposition. They don't feel that we have someone who is not voting for Putin. But of course, there is some misunderstanding, and that's not true. That is also the result of Russian propaganda and Russian TV channels, who is also broadcast in Russia today, that is broadcasting abroad in many languages, and they are showing that people in Russia, they are supporting Putin, and there is like 86% of Putin of people who support Putin. But again, this data is not completely true. If we take a look at what's happened on 26th of March, in all the Russian regions, there were like crowds of people who showed up to protest against corruption. But in the same time, media, the main TV channels that are state-owned, they didn't say any word about the protests that would happen in there. And even some web aggregators, like Yandex, there was the stories about protests in Italy, and the story about it was absurd, like about one an incident in the US when the freedom beloved co escaped from the police. So it was one of the main news in this day in the TV channels. But that is something that work not right in our hand, and that is why people who is watching probably in abroad, Russia Today, or reading some Russian stories that are broadcast and that are spread it in the internet, and they feel that we are very performing for our government, and we don't have any critical thinking. But world is very different, and there is another side of the country that is not for the current government. So that will be the remark I will say.
Yeah. Unlike with Russian media, on the 29th of March, when there were protests, the waves of protests all around Russia, Ukrainian media was covering and was following it quite and covering it quite precisely. I think that it's probably the Ukrainian journalists, many of my colleagues, they still keep in touch with some of the Russian journalists, for instance, from Dozhd, but there are very delicate situations, like when Dozhd published the map of Russia with Crimea, that included Crimea. It's kind of it ended the friendly relationship between Russian and Ukrainian journalists, and the Dozhd was banned then in Ukraine. And I remember that just probably a few days ago, the head of Dozhd channel, the CEO,
she made the interview.
She apologized, for that.
She made the interview for Current Time, that is the project of Radio Free Europe, for Timur Alevsky, and she told that most of Russians, they're feeling sorry for what's happened in Ukraine in 2014, and they are feeling sorry that TV Rain, that is actually was performing as the talking about this the situation, and they are now forbidden in Ukraine. So.
Yeah, so it's just very complicated, to say that all Russia is Kremlin, because many Ukrainians, they have relatives in Russia, and they communicate with them. Like for example, I also have relatives, and I try to provide them with other sources of information. So there is so you can distinguish between those two things.
I will add, I will add very briefly, if I understand your question correctly. I think I'm really openly against these narratives that if Russia is an occupant of the a big part of our territory, we don't speak to Russians, and we don't have to relationships with Russians. I'm really against this narrative, and I'm always trying to fight against these narratives, because I see a lot of, and I hear a lot of thoughts in my generation that they call, when they see some Russians in my country, they become aggressive, and I'm really against this kind of narratives. And because me and Ksenia are sitting now together, and we have a lot of professional and not only professional conversations between about our countries and politics, our country. I think these kind of conversations and discussions, sometimes listening criticism is the best way to distinguish this politic and Russian people itself.
Okay, that's a very useful and positive note to end on. We are out of time, so I would hope you join me in thanking our panelists and thanking Ambassador Komonachek and Joanna Levinson, who made this event possible. So thank you all.